Hi, everyone. Uh, can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. All right. So, thank you everybody for taking time out of I'm sure Jamaica is beautiful. It's a Sunday afternoon and you would, many of you would rather be somewhere else, I hope, but you're here. And so that is great. I'm excited to actually have this conversation. I frame it as a conversation. Based on my introduction, yes, I do have a strong background in special education and working with children with disabilities. But as Makal alluded to earlier, in serving kids with with learning disabilities generally, it takes a village. It's just not one person. And so that's why I'm framing this as a conversation, I talking with you to kind of, together collectively think about how we can best support these children from a very, very early age. And it is true. The earlier we are able to diagnose their needs and provide the necessary supports, the better the outcomes will be for them in their adulthood. So thank you for being here. And so I just want to go back and connect a little bit to the poll that was given about what age, and I'm so happy and that whoever participated in the poll correctly said earlier than 5. That is what it should be, but you are the I have to tell you, you're part of the minority because not everybody thinks that students should be identified before the age of 5, or rather they don't know that, but we know that a lot of kids, especially here in the United States and everywhere in the world, they get identified later. In my experience, especially the students with the milder disabilities, would go under the radar undetected until they reach third grade or fourth grade, and at that time, things it's not the best time. It might not be. I mean, it might be too late for some of the kids, and it will take longer. When they're identified later, then it takes longer for them to um, make the gains they need and to catch up with everybody else so that they can have the positive outcomes necessary for them to succeed as adults. And so it is important that we know that the earlier the better. And I'm glad that the people that participated in the poll say that. So thinking about that scenario of Carrie, she's an infant, right? 2 years old, so still early. And it is described that she had limited speech and often avoids eye contact, and they prefer to play alone. So when you think about her, uh, she is quiet or showing early signs. So what would that be? And this is a question. I would like some responses. You can type them in there, and we can look in the chat later to see what you type. So thinking about, is she just quiet, or is she demonstrating some early signs of challenges that might impact her in school later when she gets into grade school? So that is something that I would pause for you guys uh, to 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 give me a response, but keep it up behind in your head and also the responses. But by the end of this, I want to see if your answer changes based on what we discussed today. So So I said it's really important to do that, to identify students early. And the question is why? Why is that important? This is what research shows that evidence shows that the early brain development is critical to students being able to learn. When they don't develop early, they are not able to absorb the information they need, especially in the academic environments, to make the gains necessary to succeed in their school career and beyond. So it's really critical. And so when we are able to detect the students' needs, and they not necessarily could be needs that are associated with cognitive. It could be, range from environmental factors, but as educators or all stakeholders being able to detect that early enough, the challenges early enough, then we are able to actually plan for intervention early so that we can provide the support needed so the student is not struggling academically and otherwise. Because if they're struggling, then their brain is not developing in the ways that it needs to be to set them up for success. And so when this happens, when early detection happens and prevention measures are in place early, then this does eventually improve the confidence of the outcomes. And in this case, it's those positive outcomes that we all are expecting and hope for every student, including the ones that we're specifically talking about in this series. All right. So you might have talked about this in your previous session, the introduction, but I will just briefly talk about it. So what is a learning challenge? And sometimes when we think about learning challenges, a lot of educators and persons who work with children with disabilities, they kind of divert that to something being wrong with the child or the student. And so when we're thinking about challenges, we should change the approach in which we look at challenges. I ask that we look at the challenges as a children just learning differently, or a child who is learning differently or absorbs information in a different way than it's typically presented in the school environment. Research again shows that majority of teachers teach to the average child, the child in the middle, the average child. And when we do that, we have students who may have challenges such as dyslexia, or they may have DHT that might not be able to meet the standards that the average student is being taught with. And then on the flip side, and I know that Makoa did allude to that, we have gifted students who, when teachers focus on that average student, then they're being left behind. They are not being challenged enough. And these are the students that you might probably see that they start engaging in what is termed as unbecoming behaviors, the behaviors that are not with the rules and the regulations of the classroom. And so it could be that they're just not challenged at all because you are teaching to the average child and they already know the material in the classroom. So bottom line, when the point I'm trying to make here is that when we're thinking about students who may be experiencing learning challenges, we want to change our approach and perspective to think about those students as learning differently. And so when we think about them in that matter, then we are putting the onus back on us, the adults, to challenge ourselves to approach the teaching or the instruction or the knowledge giving in different ways that those students are able to absorb the knowledge in. And so as I give some examples are dyslexia, which is really a reading disability. When a child is struggling with different forms of literacy, then they might have dyslexia. We always, when we talk about dyslexia, we also have dysgraphia, which has to do specifically with writing, and then we have dyscalculia, which has to do specifically with math. But the most common one that we hear about is dyslexia. And not to say that students don't struggle in math and writing. So I want to just give that to you and keep it in the back of your mind that when you talk about dyslexia, it's not the only one, but it's just an example that I'm giving. And then another common one that is very popular is ADHD. You know, when students are hyperactive in different kind of forms, then the hyperactivity interferes with the way they are learning. They are not able to focus, and that would be a challenge in itself because they need to learn the content to be able to succeed in the classroom. And when another thing has to do with speech, another example is speech and language delays. That is another area that students may struggle in. And so keeping this as examples, but then it's not an exclusive, list. There are other disabilities or areas of challenges that students may experience that I'm not going to cover today. Another thing, when we're talking about learning challenges, I want you to bear in mind, keep in mind that not all challenges are a disability. It just could be the environment. It might just mean one thing or two things are being tweaked and the student will succeed. So I'll go back to the basics before we even think about special education. If a child is having challenges, it might be as simple as maybe it's a vision issue, right? They might need glasses, and getting glasses might just fix that, right? And so really, those are some of the things that we have to start thinking about, or thinking about their hearing. If they have issues with hearing, and that is examined and to determine that it is the issue, then that might be all they needed. So in early detection, those are the factors that we all should be considering, before we move to the consideration that the child might have a disability. All right. So early detection is not limited to schools. Another important point that I want to bring across, that when we are thinking about supporting the early detection of students, we should not be looking at schools. The example of Kerry was really actually accurate and handy because it puts Kerry back at home before the school years. At 2 years old, they're not old enough to be in the schools. They might be in a daycare, probably, but most of the time, in most cases, a 2-year-old is at home with the parents, and another person or a setting that would be closely connected to Kerry would be their doctor. And so thinking about healthcare is really critical, right? And so at home, things that we can look at as parents is milestones. We have an education is really critical for families to understand children, a child's growth milestones. A child should be doing some specific things by the time they're 2 months, by the time they're 3 months, by the time they're 6 months, by the time they're a year old. There are some specific milestones expected for every child. And so if they're missing those milestones, those should be some red flags for the family, the parents at home, And so things like avoiding tests when they're school age would be a telltale sign for parents to look at. Frustration, easily frustrated with activities and works and tests, that is a telltale sign for students who are school age, but when they go back home and the parents could notice that. But at the earlier age, the healthcare providers, the child's doctor, will be really crucial. So when going back to those milestones that I was talking about, If you notice this as a parent, then you should be working in collaboration with your child's doctor so that you are all on the same pages asking those questions so that early detection again happens. Speech delays will be another an example. Developmental concerns and delays, if they're not hitting those milestones, those are areas that you're looking at and consulting with the doctor and making sure that you are providing the steps, the supports needed or the interventions needed that early before they get to step their foot in the schools. But once they're in the school, then things like, reading struggles, struggles with attention, struggles with math, basic math, counting, and things like that. Those are some of the areas that teachers would be able to observe, but also if it is behavioral, then we are looking at, how they're interacting with their classmates. Are they, having, those, are they seeking to be, to be working or playing with their classmates? Are they able to share things in the class with their classmates? So those are the things that teachers are looking at, but also would be the things that the families at home are actually looking for and considering and sharing. As I'll talk about this later, but it's really critical that this information is shared across all settings. Parents should be sharing with their child's doctor. The child doctor should be sharing these things with the parents. Parents should be sharing back with the schools, and the school should be sharing with the parents, and then the parents in turn sharing this information with the doctors so that it is a team approach. It's not a one-person game, but it's a team approach in problem solving and providing the solutions necessary. So what is critical with early detection is removing guesswork. You don't diagnose a child based on what you have observed. You might, for example, as a parent, notice that the child is not, uttering words, not speaking, not making any sounds. They're 6 months old and they're not making any sounds. You, as a parent, are not able to detect and provide a solution for that child, saying, oh, they might have this disability or have this. You notice that, you take notes, and then you share those notes with your child's doctor, who will then, more likely than not, refer you to an expert that would be able to evaluate your child. Maybe they might have some speech impairment. They might have, a different kind of a struggle that might be combined with speech impairment. So you are not an expert as a parent, but you're an expert in knowing that, hey, by this time they should be doing one thing or the other, and they're not doing it. And so early detection again means that we are basing our decisions on screening, observation, and monitoring progress. So I gave the example of parents, but this also goes to the schools. When you're working with a child in the school and you notice that they're struggling in some way or form, let's say, for example, with reading. If they're struggling with the basic reading, they're not identifying letters of the alphabet, they cannot put the sounds together to read, you as a teacher should not rush to say, oh, they have dyslexia. You are not able to diagnose that. Evidence should be collected in more than just you observing and giving your quizzes or your assessments in the classroom. And shared observation should be part of that. It's the decision about the issues that the child experiencing should not be just by you, your teacher. It should be a team effort. Who else in the school can you talk to? Who else is able to observe that child? And some questions, and I guess I'm getting ahead of myself, but asking about if the issues are happening just in your environment or if they are happening across environments. home and school, they should be able to observe the same issues for you to come to a conclusion. The use this actually requires use of real data that has been collected across contexts, not just in one context, and for a period of time, not just one time, and not make assumptions regarding what it is that the child is experiencing or not experiencing or not performing when they're supposed to perform. So the whole gist of this slide with the early detection is no guesswork. We should be using real data. We should be using multiple assessments. We should be using multiple contexts, looking at across context to make sure that what is happening for this child is not just a one-off. It is consistently happening over a period of time in different environments, and therefore having that concrete data that gives you the evidence to move forward with providing necessary interventions so that the child can make the necessary progress. So this is a whole framework. I know that in the introduction, you mentioned that I support students through the MTSS framework. And so I don't want, that's a whole topic. It's it could take hours for me to talk about MTSS, but I just wanted to provide you with a three-step detection framework for the students. So screening is easy. This is simple. Anybody can screen, right? You can screen using like quick checks. It could be observation, and you have a list of things to check off of what you are observing and what should be observed that the student is not demonstrating. So screening is just kind of overall is to check to see, is this child having an issue or lack thereof, right? So that is what screening happens. I'm checking my notes just to make sure that I am providing the necessary example. So anyway, the language difference is not does not equate to a disability, and this is another area that I'm really passionate about, in making sure that accurate diagnosis is given to a child. So, for example, if a child speaks a different language than the language of instruction in the school, the issue at the screening level, you need to, and diagnostic level, you need to make sure that the struggles are not related to the student not being fluent in that language of instruction.